On the coldest night of the year, when the wind howled like a ravenous wolf, and the thermometer dropped to a brutal -18 degrees Celsius, every living creature sought shelter from the merciless cold. But one mother dog, driven by a love fiercer than the storm itself, did something unimaginable. She led her shivering pups across icy streets, each step a desperate plea for survival, until they stood at a stranger's doorstep, hoping for a miracle. Would they be turned away, or would this night bring a miracle? This isn't just a story about a mother who loved her puppies. It's about survival and an act of pure courage in the face of brutal cold. When the world turned its back, one mother didn't give up. She made a choice that would change everything, not just for her pups, but for a lonely man inside that house, too. Stay with me till the end. This one's going to stay with you. It was the dead of winter in a small, snow-blanketed town where silence had a weight to it. The kind of silence that pressed down on your chest, made you walk faster, made your breath come out in sharp, visible puffs. Every road was slick with frozen slush. Every tree branch creaked under the weight of ice. And that wind, it wasn't just cold. It sliced, like tiny knives cutting into any exposed skin. It was the kind of night where even the lights in the windows seemed dimmer, like the cold had stolen their glow. The temperature had plummeted to -18 degrees Celsius. Not the kind of cold where you put on a few extra layers. This was the kind of cold that hurt, the kind that seeped into your bones, the kind of cold that made the world still. No kids playing outside, no neighbors chatting by the fences, just a town wrapped in frost and dread. But away from the homes with their fireplaces and thick blankets, past the main road, at the edge of that silent town, was something much more vulnerable. Underneath a battered old shed, its roof half collapsed, wooden walls cracked and leaning, lay a stray mother dog. Her fur was matted with snow, her belly hollow, her ribs showing through her coat. She was just skin, bone, and desperation. She had no name, no owner, no place she belonged, but still, she had something to protect. Pressed tightly against her side were her 3 puppies, so small they barely made a sound, so fragile they could hardly move. Their fur was thin, barely enough to shield them from the icy wind that slipped through the holes in the shed walls, and their tiny bodies shook, not from fear, but from cold so deep it reached their hearts. One of them had stopped crying. The mother dog had tried her best. She'd gone days without eating so they could nurse. She'd scavenged through bins behind restaurants, nudged open dumpsters with her nose, hoping to find something, anything, even the tiniest scrap of bread or a half-frozen piece of meat. And every time she left the shed, her heart pounded with fear, because while she was out searching, they were alone in that freezing dark, where one wrong gust of wind, one delay, could mean never seeing them alive again. She'd started to run faster, shorter trips, even if it meant less food. She had to return quicker. She couldn't risk it. Not with the cold growing harsher every night. But this night, it was different. The wind was no longer something she could block with her body. Her warmth wasn't enough anymore. They clung to her, but their shivers didn't stop. She could feel them getting colder. She could feel the life slipping. That shed, once a shelter, had become a death trap. And that's when something inside her broke. Or maybe something woke up, because for the first time, she didn't just wait. She didn't just hope it would get better. She stood. Her legs were weak, her paws cracked and bleeding from walking over frozen gravel and snow. But she stood, slowly, carefully. She moved each of her puppies, one by one, to her belly, tucked them close, and then she picked one up gently in her mouth. She looked back once at the shed, and she walked, but she didn't walk toward food. She walked toward people. She didn't understand doors, or houses, or which ones had kind hearts behind them. But she knew humans meant warmth. Somewhere inside, she'd seen it once, maybe a memory, maybe just instinct, but she walked toward it. The snow came down harder. Her steps were slow. Her body screamed in pain, but still she moved. One house after another, all quiet, no lights in the windows, no one watching, no one opening the door. But she didn't stop. With her last bit of strength, she approached one more house, a small, single-story home with a sagging porch and frost on the windows. Nothing special, but something about it made her stop. She placed the puppy gently on the doormat, and then she barked, just once, soft, cracked, more of a whisper than a sound. She waited, nothing, so she barked again, then turned back. She still had 2 more to bring. That night, she walked that road 3 times. 3 tiny puppies, 3 quiet cries. Each time she placed them at the door, she made a sound, faint, pleading, and each time, she waited, not for food, but for help. Inside the house, a man had just returned from work, tired, hungry, ready to collapse on the couch with a blanket and tea. But something stopped him, a sound. He opened the door. At first, he thought the wind was playing tricks on him. But there, under the pale yellow porch light, was a sight he'd never forget. 3 tiny puppies, motionless, and a mother dog, lying down now, breathing heavy, her body curled around them, shielding them from the cold one last time. Her eyes met his, not begging, not barking, just waiting for a choice. Would he turn away like the others had, or would he do something? Because this wasn't just a stray looking for food. This was a mother who had nothing, yet gave everything. And now, with the wind howling louder, the snow piling higher, and time running out, the challenge wasn't hers anymore. It was his. Would he answer? Because if he didn't, that family wouldn't survive the night. And that's how one of the coldest nights of the year turned into the most important decision of someone's life. Not for the mother dog, but for the stranger at the door. No one knows exactly how she picked a house. Maybe it was the faint smell of chicken soup escaping through the window cracks, teasing her nose. Maybe it was the soft golden light glowing through the curtains, a rare warmth in a world that had only shown her coldness. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something deeper, a silent pull, a gut feeling, the last thread of instinct that told her, here, maybe here, they'd be safe. She didn't bark. She didn't scratch the door like most strays would. She just stepped up, quiet, hesitant. She placed one paw gently on the wooden step, then another, then sat there, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion, her head tilting ever so slightly as she looked up. Her puppies, wrapped in a dirty torn sweater she had somehow dragged behind her, lay shivering just inches away from her hind legs. The house belonged to a man named Thomas. Thomas was 67. He lived alone, in the same 2-bedroom home he'd built with his bare hands 40 years ago. The paint was peeling now, the walls quiet, the air always a little too still. After his wife, Eliza, passed away 3 winters ago, the holidays stopped meaning anything. No more decorations, no more cards, no laughter echoing through the kitchen, just silence, and the soft hum of an old heater that clicked when it turned on. Thomas wasn't a mean man, just tired of loss, tired of memories, and most of all, tired of hoping for something different. That night, the wind had been especially cruel. He'd just turned off the news, same headlines, same noise, and had sat down in his recliner with a mug of lukewarm tea when he heard it. Tap. He ignored it. Tap, pause, tap again. He frowned. It wasn't urgent, not loud, but it was there. A presence. He rose from his chair with a sigh, pulled the curtain aside, and peeked out the frost-covered window. He didn't see anything at first, just white, snow piled high on the edges of his porch. But something moved, something small. He opened the door. The air slapped him in the face instantly, cold and dry. And then he saw her. A dog. Not large, not small. Medium maybe. Her fur was matted with snow and mud, her body thin, and those eyes wide, full of something between fear and pleading. She didn't flinch when the door opened, didn't growl, didn't move. Behind her, a lumpy pile of fabric. No, not fabric. Puppies. 3 tiny ones, barely larger than his hand, curled into the fabric like it was their last lifeline. Thomas stared. She stared back. No words were spoken, but something passed between them, a silent understanding. Then, almost imperceptibly, she lowered her head, as if to say, please. Thomas stood frozen in the doorway. Every logical part of his brain said no. He hadn't let anything or anyone into that house in years, not even his own niece, when she dropped by around the holidays. But that night, something cracked. He stepped back, and the dog moved, slowly, as if she was afraid the opportunity would vanish. She nudged her first pup with her nose, gently encouraging it forward. It stumbled clumsily across the porch, barely managing to stay upright in the cold. Then the second, then the third. She followed behind them, each step careful. She didn't look around. She didn't sniff. She walked in as if she'd lived there her whole life, except with more respect than anyone who ever had. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wave. Her legs nearly gave out, but she stayed standing until the last puppy had found a corner of the rug near the heater. Then she curled around them and lay down. Thomas didn't speak. He just stood there watching. She licked the smallest puppy's head. It whimpered. Then another nuzzled into her neck. And in that moment, Thomas felt something strange in his chest. Tight but not painful. Alive. He fetched an old towel from the hall closet and laid it down next to them. She looked up at him. Didn't flinch. Just blinked. Slow and grateful. The hours passed slowly. He brewed a new cup of tea, then poured some warm water into a shallow bowl and placed it in front of her. She sniffed it, then drank, fast at first, then slower. Thomas hadn't spoken to anyone in days, but now the silence felt less lonely. He found a can of tuna in the back of the pantry and placed it in a plate. She didn't touch it until her pups were asleep. Then she ate in small, careful bites, almost as if afraid of appearing rude. He chuckled under his breath. "You've got manners," he said. She flicked her ears, but kept eating. That night, Thomas didn't sleep in his room. He sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around him, the dog and her puppies just a few feet away on the rug. Every so often, she'd lift her head and look at him, not with fear, with something softer, trust. It had been a long time since someone had looked at him like that. The next morning, the snow had stopped, but Thomas didn't open the door to let them out. He made oatmeal and spooned out some for her with a little warm milk. He wasn't sure if dogs could eat oatmeal, but she seemed grateful. The pups suckled quietly. He watched them for a long time. There was one, the smallest, who struggled to feed. The runt. Thomas gently lifted him and placed him near her belly. The mother didn't growl, didn't flinch. "Just let him help," he whispered. "That one's a fighter." By the third day, the living room looked different. There was a folded blanket under the window now, where the sun hit mid-morning, a water bowl on a tray, a second-hand dog bed he'd found in the attic, cleaned and dusted. The puppies were more alert. Their eyes opened wider. They yawned and stretched. One even barked a tiny, ridiculous sound that made Thomas laugh out loud. He hadn't laughed like that in years. The mother, he started calling her Mabel, seemed to trust him now. She let him sit beside her, let him stroke her head, and when he did, she leaned into his hand, just a little. Thomas began to talk to her in the evenings, telling her about Eliza, about the garden they used to keep, the way she'd always wanted a dog, but they never got around to it. "You're a little late," he said one night, smiling at Mabel, "but better late than never." Days turned into a week. The town was still frozen outside, but inside that little house, there was life again. He set up a small barrier with cushions, so the pups wouldn't wander too far, bought puppy formula just in case, even found an old baby monitor in the attic, and placed one half near their blanket. He didn't know why, maybe just to listen, because suddenly, silence wasn't comforting anymore. Silence now meant something might be wrong, and he couldn't bear to lose again. The first few hours after Thomas let the mother dog and her puppies into his home were filled with tension, a quiet but heavy kind, the kind of tension that sat in your chest and didn't let go. The puppies were far too cold. Their tiny bodies barely moved. Their chests rose and fell, but the rhythm was slow, uncertain, too quiet, too still. Thomas had never dealt with this before. He'd worked machines his whole life, not delicate little lives, but there was no time to hesitate. He grabbed towels from the linen closet, some clean and some a bit too old, and carefully wrapped each of the shivering pups. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the fear that he might already be too late. He placed them near the heater, adjusting the old radiator knobs to push out more warmth. Then he searched his cupboards. No dog food, of course, but there was chicken, a leftover breast he'd been planning to eat tomorrow. He didn't think twice. He shredded it with his fingers and placed it on a plate. The mother dog, still silent, still watching, sniffed the food but didn't eat right away. Her eyes flicked back to her puppies, and only when she saw them wrapped and placed gently near the heater did she inch forward. She took small bites, chewing slowly, almost politely, never once turning her back on her babies. Every time one of them whimpered, she stopped eating and moved to nudge them, lick their ears, press her nose into their fur. She was more than a mother. She was their entire world. Thomas sat on the floor, back against the wall, watching it all unfold like a scene from a life he didn't know he needed. He stayed up all night. He didn't even realize the hours passing. He just watched the rise and fall of their tiny chests. Watched her, how she cared, how she stayed alert. It reminded him of someone, his wife. She'd been like that too, quiet, careful, always putting others first, always noticing the small things, like when Thomas had a bad day, or when the heater made a strange sound. She would have known exactly what to do right now. She would have taken those puppies in without hesitation, would have named them before the snow melted from their fur. And so, sometime around 2 a.m., Thomas found himself whispering, words he hadn't said in years. "You're okay now. You're warm. You're safe. You're home." He didn't even know who he was talking to. The mother, the pups, or maybe himself. At some point, he must have dozed off. Just for a moment, when he opened his eyes again, the room was still dim but felt warmer. Not just from the radiator, but something deeper, something alive. And then it happened. Around 3 a.m., the smallest puppy, a tiny, pale-bellied one, stretched its legs, let out a long, squeaky yawn, and blinked its eyes fully open for the first time. Thomas sat up straight. He didn't say a word, just watched. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, slow, unsure, as if his face had forgotten how. But it stayed. He smiled, for the first time in months, maybe years. By morning, the entire house felt different. It wasn't just warm, it was alive. The mother dog, now dry and fed, had started showing small signs of trust. She would walk over to him slowly, her eyes still cautious, but soft. She'd rest her head lightly on his knee and close her eyes. Not sleep, not yet, but a rest she hadn't allowed herself in days. He named her Luna. The name came to him like a memory, something distant, gentle, and full of light. And the puppies? He gave them names too. Max, the biggest one with floppy ears. Millie, the curious one who already tried to crawl toward the couch. And Dot, the little one who yawned first, the one who started it all. He didn't even know why he picked those names. They just felt right. Luna didn't just save her puppies that night. She saved him too. He started doing things he hadn't in ages. Cleaned the living room, moved the old quilt off the couch, started the fireplace, cooked meals with care. Not just soup from a can, but actual meals, broth, chicken, rice. And every day, Luna grew more relaxed. She started wagging her tail when he walked into the room. The puppies began crawling, tumbling, even letting out tiny barks that sounded more like hiccups. Thomas found himself laughing, out loud, at nothing, at everything. He wasn't just surviving winter anymore. He was living through it. One morning, about a week later, the postman left a package at the door. He hadn't ordered anything, but when he opened it, he found a small dog bed, some toys, and a note from the local shelter. Someone saw you take them in. We thought you might need these. Thank you for being their miracle. He stared at the note for a long time, then folded it carefully, placed it in the drawer beside his bed, and went to check on Luna and the pups. They were sleeping, all four, huddled together in the sunlight spilling through the window. He stood there, hand on the doorframe, and smiled again, because for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He felt needed, and that feeling, in a quiet house filled with new life, was the most unexpected gift of all. Luna didn't just bring her puppies to safety. She brought Thomas back to himself, back to warmth, back to life. And in that moment, when the smallest bark echoed through the room, when Luna wagged her tail just once before falling asleep, he knew something for certain. They weren't going anywhere, not ever again. As winter gradually gave way to the first hints of spring, a subtle transformation began to take place in the town. People who had known Thomas for years, who had long stopped visiting his quiet, solitary home, started to talk. There was something different about him now, something that hadn't been there for a long time. Thomas, the man who had once kept to himself, had opened his heart in ways no one thought possible. And it all started with the knock on his door, the knock of a mother dog desperate for help. No one could have guessed that this simple act would bring such profound change, not just to Thomas, but to the town itself. The first signs of this change appeared when neighbors, who hadn't seen Thomas smile in years, began to stop by his house. At first, they were hesitant, unsure of what had caused the sudden shift in Thomas's behavior. Was it just the dogs? Was it something else? They weren't sure, but they couldn't deny that the man they once knew as a quiet, lonely figure was now sharing his life with others. Luna, the mother dog, became an integral part of this newfound life. Wherever Thomas went, she followed. She was always by his side, whether he was tending to the garden, walking to the mailbox, or simply sitting on the porch, enjoying the warmth of the sun. She had become more than just a pet. She was a companion, a source of comfort, and a constant reminder of the miracle that had changed their lives. The puppies, Max, Millie, and Dot, grew stronger each day. They were no longer the fragile little beings who had been on the brink of death that cold night. Their coats became thicker, the tails wagged with energy, and they explored the yard with the curiosity that only puppies could have. Thomas watched them with a sense of pride, knowing that he had been a part of their survival and that they had somehow saved him in return. He spent hours every day with them, playing in the yard, teaching them little tricks, or simply sitting with them in front of the fire, watching their small bodies curl up against him. Each time one of the puppies would fall asleep at his feet, he would glance down at them, feeling a sense of peace he had never known before. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Thomas sat alone in his favorite armchair. Luna lay beside him, her head resting on his knee. while the three puppies curled up at his feet, their tiny bodies gently rising and falling with each breath. The warmth of the fire seemed to fill the room, but it was the warmth in his heart that truly enveloped him. He had never realized just how lonely he had been. For years, he had kept to himself, unwilling to open his heart to anyone or anything. But now, as he looked down at the dogs that had come into his life, he realized that something had shifted within him. The grief that had weighed him down for so long was finally starting to lift. Luna and the puppies had shown him that love and connection could come in unexpected forms. They had shown him that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for new beginnings. Thomas whispered softly, almost to himself, as he gazed at the small family he had found. "You didn't just knock on my door, you opened it." Those words held more weight than he could express. Luna and the puppies hadn't just found their way into his home, they had found their way into his heart. They had reminded him of what it meant to care for something beyond himself, to share his life with others, and to be present in the world around him. They had given him a second chance, and in doing so, they had opened a door he never thought he would walk through again. As the weeks passed, Thomas found himself becoming more involved with his community. Neighbors who had once avoided him began stopping by to visit, to meet Luna and the puppies, and to check in on the man who had so suddenly and unexpectedly become a part of their lives. They marveled at how much he had changed, at how the man who had once been so solitary now smiled, laughed, and spoke to others with a warmth that was hard to miss. It wasn't just the dogs that had brought this change. It was the love and the joy they had introduced into his life. And in turn, Thomas had shared that love with others, creating new bonds and rekindling old ones. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the town, Thomas stood on his porch, watching Luna and the puppies run through the yard. They were playing in the grass, their bodies lithe and full of energy, their tails wagging with every step. He couldn't help but smile, a genuine, heartwarming smile that had been absent for so long. In that moment, Thomas realized that life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. For all his years of solitude, for all the pain he had carried with him, the universe had sent him a gift in the form of a stray dog and her puppies. And through them, he had found something he had been missing for a long time: connection. As the days went by, Thomas's relationship with his neighbors deepened. He found himself helping them with small tasks around their homes, offering a hand when it was needed. He no longer isolated himself. He was part of something bigger now, a community that cared, a family that included not just people, but animals as well. One evening, as the family gathered in front of the fire, Luna rested her head on Thomas's knee, and the puppies curled up at his feet. It felt like a moment frozen in time, a moment that was too perfect to last forever. But Thomas didn't mind. He had learned to appreciate the small, fleeting moments of happiness, knowing that they were precious. Looking around at the warmth of his home, at the life that had once seemed so distant, Thomas felt a sense of gratitude fill his heart. He wasn't just living anymore, he was truly alive. And it was all thanks to the love and compassion that Luna and her puppies had brought into his life. That night, as Thomas lay in bed, he thought about everything that had happened in the past few months. He thought about how far he had come, how much he had changed, and how much he had grown. And in the quiet of the night, with Luna and the puppies by his side, he realized that he had found a new family, one that had opened his heart in ways he never thought possible. As the fire burned low and the world outside grew still, Thomas whispered to the darkness, his voice filled with warmth and gratitude. "You didn't just knock on my door, you opened it." Sometimes the smallest act of courage opens the biggest doors, not just for survival, but for love. Subscribe for more stories that prove love can show up in the coldest places.